Thank you everyone for joining. Today, myself, Archie Agrawal, along with Vince and Kevin, we're gonna talk you about app registration improvements. I'm gonna start first and I'm gonna cover quick starts as well as deprecation of our developer experiences, a few other developer experiences. So starting with quick starts, with the recent improvements we have made in quick starts, we've made it even easier to help you get started with the Microsoft Identity platform. The quick starts help you build a simple app that enables you to sign in with your users or app's identity and then call Microsoft Graph API in a few steps. With the new improvements, developers get pre-configured code with their app's properties like app ID, secrets, or anything that needs to run your app successfully. And you no longer need to copy paste code blobs between the Azure portal into your local machine. With that, I would get into a quick demo of what the experience looks like. So I'm gonna register a new app. I'm gonna get into the quick starts blade. And then I'm gonna try out the ASP.NET Core Quick Start. So as you can see, it's split up into 3 sections. Step 1, I would go ahead and configure my application. So this little thing will do the magic of configuring all of these values automatically just by clicking this button. Once that is done, I'm gonna download the code sample. I'm gonna extract it. And then I'm gonna run the solution. So as you can see, let's tally the tenant ID and the client ID from the app registration experience. So my app ID starts with 7C7, ends with 44B. And it seems to have done the right thing by including the correct app ID. And then my tenant ID starts with BFE, ends with 54F. And then it seems to have taken that over from the portal. Now I'm gonna go ahead and run the sample. Let's see what permissions is it asking me. So access to my basic profile and then maintaining access to the basic profile. I'm gonna accept it. And voila, I've already signed into my app. I can sign out and then sign in with a different account as well. So with that, I hope this was useful and I'm happy to take any questions you have on quick starts.
Yeah, actually, a quick question. So is it only supporting the .NET code as of now? Or I can download any other language code as well?
No, it supports 11 languages right now. And if I go back to the Azure portal and then show you the list of supported languages we have currently. Is there anything you would like to see here that is not already present?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I don't see Node.js though, but yeah, I think Java, Python is good. Like
okay, I would take that feedback. But definitely try these out. It's super simple. We promise that it only takes a few steps, and it does. And feel free to leave us feedback from either this section right here, where if you want to see any other content, or directly from the quick start itself, just by filling this out or as well as putting any verbal comments you may have here. Any other questions?
There is one more. Does it use version 1 or beta endpoints?
For Graph?
It doesn't. Do you want to expand on that question? Well, if you want to answer it that way, that would be great. Not sure.
Yeah, so this supports the whole of Microsoft Graph landscape. So you could use any version you like. It doesn't restrict you from using only beta or only V1 or only generally available graph endpoints, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, he did expand. It says because we need data exported via graph beta. Mm-hmm. And then is it possible to specify which environment? So
yes, it supports the whole graph API landscape. So if you have /beta, it would support /beta. If you have /v1, it would support /v1. So there is no restriction in terms of which instance of graph API can you call.
Okay, that's great. Is it limited to OAuth or OIDC based apps?
It is right now OIDC based apps. The quickstarts, yeah.
Okay, I think we're good on that for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next section, I'm going to talk about the end of life of our older developer portals. So that includes app registration legacy experience in the Azure portal, as well as application registration portal. Application registration portal has the URL apps.dev.microsoft.com. So when we announced general availability of our new app registration experience in Build 2019, so last May, we shared our planned and end of life for the other developer portals we have, which is app registration portal as well as app registration legacy experience of the Azure portal. So now that we have a single place where developers can configure all their apps that sign in Azure Active Directory accounts and personal Microsoft account, we wanted to share once again the timelines and remind you that please start using the new experience. So for the app registration portal experience, which is apps.dev.microsoft.com, end of life happened on December 15, 2019 for users with Azure AD accounts and personal Microsoft accounts, except for live SDK apps. These type of apps are not yet supported in the new experience, but we expect support in the future. So if you continue using apps.dev.microsoft.com for live SDK apps, you would soon move on to the Azure portal as well. And the next section here is app registration legacy experience in the Azure portal. So the end of life happened very recently on March 1, 2020 for users with Azure AD accounts and personal Microsoft accounts, except for Azure AD B2C accounts. Deprecation of B2C accounts will soon follow the general availability of the new experience in B2C tenants. And then I have linked our deprecation blog that will help you navigate the timelines better. It also has links to training guides. So if you are more familiar with one of the older experiences, we want to make it easy for you to transition to the new experience. And with that, I want to thank you for using Microsoft Identity Platform. Any questions on deprecation?
Nope, it doesn't look like it at the moment.
All right, thank you.
So hey folks, my name is Vince. I think some of you may know me over the years from working on access control scenarios. And what I'm going to walk through today is what we call per application role-based access control. One of the things we've heard from customers for some time now is the challenge around delegating permissions to manage specific parts of applications. In particular, the most common scenario we hear is around, hey, I have a help desk support team or a set of developer services in my organization, and I need to grant them the ability to roll certificates on an application without the ability to do other things like configure display names or requested permissions or these authentication settings, those kinds of things around the application. So let me go ahead and I'll just walk through. And I love doing MVP demos, particularly because we get such great enthusiastic interaction. So I just encourage y'all, if you have questions or if you want to talk about specific things, don't hesitate. Feel free to interrupt me or just start shouting stuff out. I sort of love that level of chaos we sometimes get. I'm going to share my screen. So here I am, and I'm just in the Azure Portal on the App Registrations tab here in Azure AD. I'm going to click on an application. This is an application registration. And from here, you'll see we have a new tab called Roles and Administrators. When I go here, this is the place we're going to move all of our access control to. And you'll find that this tab exists both at the tenant level as well as on each individual app registration. And so from here, I can click New Role. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up the role to grant the permissions that we just talked about, which is I have in my pseudo company, I have a set of support folks who manage certificates for applications. Now I could hit that new role button at the tenant level, or I can hit that new role button here, and it actually does the same thing. We're going to create the role at the tenant level, and that role will be available to be assigned at any individual application or at the tenant level to grant access over all applications. Let's call this Credential Manager. Can manage credentials of app registrations. And I'll hit Next. And here I'm presented with a list of permissions. So this is and I just want to say, this is our initial experience. This experience will improve over time to do better grouping and better filtering abilities. But for now, if I just look up the credential permission, I can see that I have application credentials and what are called my organizational apps credentials. So this is the ability to up the credentials of just internal apps, applications that are marked as single tenant, versus the ability to update credentials for any application, whether that's a single tenant application or an app that my organization is publishing in multi-tenant scenarios. So I'll go ahead and check that. And then, so here is the permission, or excuse me, the role I just created with the specific permission of the ability to update credentials on app registrations. When I hit create, you'll see that new role shows up in my list of available roles that I can assign to users and to service principals. So I'll go ahead and I'll go in here and I'll add a new assignment. Let's add it to Chang. So I've added Chang as a credential manager. And what I've done is to be very clear here, I've made this assignment at the Postman app, right? So I could have assigned Chang this role even out here at the tenant level, right? You'll find I have a whole bunch of roles here, but if you go here, so actually no one is assigned this brand new role I created at the tenant level, but Chen is assigned at the Postman level. If I go through here, you'll see I actually have Cheng here. So let's go ahead and we'll sign in as Cheng now that he has this new role. And again, folks, if you have any questions, just shout out. Happy to answer as I go.
There is one question. Dean asked how can we tell who created a role?
There's an audit event, Dean, for every time a new role is created or updated or deleted. Every time someone is added to a role or removed from a role, there'll be a corresponding event in the Azure AD audit logs. So here I am signed in. I can go to app registrations, and I can go to Postman. So Postman is the app on which I, as Chang, have access. But the specific access I have is around the ability to manage certificates, to manage credentials. So if I go here under Postman, certificates and secrets, I can go ahead and I can create a new client secret, and you'll see that that will actually work, right? I just created that. But if I go up to authentication, for example, on the Postman app, I'm actually not able to do anything in terms of manage the authentication for Postman, nor am I going. Can I go, for example, go try to request new permissions for the Postman app, right? So because we've just granted in this credential manager role, we've only granted this specific permission. That's the only permission that Chang has. Likewise, because we've done the role assignment, we've granted Chang the credential manager role over the Postman app. As Chang, if I go out to say, for example, the company payroll app, and I go try to manage certificates on a different app, again, Chang doesn't have access here. Now I could go back and I could actually grant Chang access, say on company payroll. And here's where I could actually, you'll see there's the same role, and I can actually grant that role again to somebody like Bianca. And now Bianca would be able to manage credentials on the company payroll app, and Chang would be able to manage credentials on the Postman app, but neither could do the inverse. So we're hoping that with this functionality, we can help with that what's turned out to be a rather challenging delegation problem for our customers, as well as we move forward, even out of the app registration space. The next place we're going to start exposing this level of granularity is enterprise apps, and then in the consent model, and then eventually into groups and devices and users until we cover the entire directory. So that's it for my presentation. I don't know if folks have questions around that.
There are a few questions.
So feel free. This is an opportunity. I'll answer this in the chat, but feel free to also, ask me any questions you like around, hey, why aren't you guys doing this? Or, hey, when's timeline for that? Those kinds of questions I love, because we can be very open with you all. Which admin roles is required to create roles in their specific apps? So great. So today, the global administrator and what we call the privileged role administrator can manage all permissions. So we don't have anything that's specific for on a per app basis, but it is something in our backlog to be able to grant just the ability to do to create and manage role assignments at specific scopes. Also, what if access to Azure AD Blade is restricted for not? Yes. So if access to Azure AD Blade is restricted for non-admin users, that is currently a challenge for us. It's a great question. This is the kind of MVP questions I love. So we are today, that switch will actually block access. And that switch is it's been a thorn in my paw for quite a while. We will, in the fullness of time, we will support the ability to grant or revoke read permissions across the directory. So you can actually revoke someone's ability to read specific parts of the directory. That switch today is a portal-specific switch. It only revokes or allows permission via the portal and actually doesn't restrict any access through Graph API or through PowerShell or the other interfaces. So we're working on that. But just know for now, the simple answer is that switch will continue to block access except for tenant level administrators. What else we got? So is there a list of permissions on what they grant? Yes, Rob. So we have in the documentation, we have a full list of permissions along with the corresponding descriptions and what those permissions grant access to. We're also working on, we're trying to get to a place where we can actually, from within the portal experience, from being able to, where we want to get to is, if I'm looking at this page, that I actually have an ability either through some gesture, through a button, or through some call out, where I can actually, as a flyout, I can see here are the permissions that grant access to this page, so that you can get a much better connection between the set of permissions that are available and how they relate to the data as it exists on the page that you're looking at. Let's see. It'd be a good idea if the access denied message is clearly say which, yes. So Dean, great. That's exactly the challenge that we're looking to solve with what I was just talking about. Vittorio, how can I allow an application owner to see the login logs only for a specific application? Great question. So as part of our work for enterprise apps, so what I just described in terms of the permissions, the client-grained permissions for app registrations, we're doing the exact same things for the enterprise apps experience. As part of that work, we will support granular sign-in report viewing. So you'll be able to actually grant someone the ability to read sign-in logs at say, for example, at Salesforce. And now when someone goes to the sign-in logs for that particular app, they'll see the sign-in logs, but if they go out and try to view the global sign-in logs, they'll actually get access denied. Can we create these roles via PowerShell and Graph? Yes. We support PowerShell, Microsoft Graph, as well as the portal experience.
I just learned about attribute-based access control in AWS. Is anything similar planned for AAD?
Yeah, so Dean, so we actually, ABAC. We actually have some early plans that we're working through in terms of ABAC now. We don't have anything concrete to announce on this, but we're taking it seriously. There's my boss, you guys know Stuart Kwan. He's my boss. He's actually heading up a project to go do a lot of investigation, a lot of understanding around ABAC. I'm surprised no one has anyone asked. I was waiting for, usually I wait till someone asks, can I do PIM on these? Yes. Yes, we fully support privileged identity management so that you can do elevation and activations to custom roles using PIM. I think that's it. New messages? Anyone else? All right. Well, feel free to shoot me emails. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me, again, vincesm@microsoft.com. If you have any questions or if you want to give us any more feedback, happy to do so. I'm also on the MVP distribution list. So if you just post questions there, I'll be sure to answer them. Thank you. I turn it over to Kevin. Is it you now?
Yes. Thanks, Vince.
Yep.
All right, cool. We're going to jump into the relatively new token configuration experience. This is a public preview experience in the app registrations portal blade that Archie had talked about earlier. We launched this late last year. And so what I'll do is I will go over kind of some background for optional claims, why they're useful, kind of the challenges that some of our customers faced. And then I will do a demo, kind of like Vince did with the token configuration experience. So in terms of background, what are optional claims? Developers can use optional claims in their Azure AD apps to specify what claims they want in the tokens that are sent back to their application. And typically an application can use these claims for a couple different things, authorization purposes, authentication purposes. And essentially, you can include these additional claims in your tokens. And why are we talking about optional claims? Why are they optional in the first place? Well, one of the goals of the Microsoft Identity Platform and the V2 endpoint was smaller token sizes. So as a result, a bunch of claims that were used to be included in the V1 ID and access tokens are no longer included by default in the V2 tokens. And so pause here. When I talk about V2 tokens and V2 apps, I'm talking about, if you recall Archie talking about the app registrations experience, the one that Vince actually just showed. If you register an app using that new current experience, that is going to be a V2 application. And the ID tokens are always going to be V2 tokens. The access tokens are going to depend on the resource that you're calling. So if you're calling Microsoft Graph, for example, they're going to be V1 tokens, but it really depends. If you're calling your own private APIs, it depends on what that resource is specifying in terms of the token version. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about V2 tokens versus V1 tokens and V2 apps. Another quick note there, if you're using the legacy experience, again, Archie talked about this, that's the portal experience with the apps.dev.microsoft.com. That's being deprecated soon. Those are V1 applications. So you're always going to get V1 ID tokens. The reason I kind of paused to explain that is, as you can see here in this table, there are a bunch of different types of optional claims. There are some in the first column you see there that are V2 specific. All that means is that these V2 tokens, again, if you use the new app registration experience to register your app, there's 9 optional claims so far that are no longer included. They were included in V1 apps or V1 tokens. They're not included in V2 tokens. V1, V2 common, that's the second column you see there. There's 20 of those. All that means is these optional claims, and I'll provide the documentation link later on that has all these claims. That just means that whether you're using a V1 token or a V2 token, they're optional. Those 20 that we list in the documentation, they're not included by default in V1 tokens or V2 tokens. Then you have directory extension optional claims. What these are if you create a directory extension user object, you see there in the third column, I have an example of Skype ID or office location. If you've created that using, say, MS Graph, you can actually have that information included, up to 15 of those if your application requires them in an optional claim. And then groups. There are certain applications that require group information to make authentication authorization decisions. And so you can also request back group IDs and in groups claims, and I'll demo that as well. All right, so additional background here. So the availability of optional claims is determined by a few different things. It's determined by the token type. I talked about that earlier, V1 versus V2, the token version, and the source, whether it's just a standard one that we list that is in our documentation, or it's a custom one like an extension, custom extension claim that you created based on a user object. It also depends on the type of user signing into the app. And so I've just kind of put this together to illustrate that as a developer, as a tenant admin, as an app admin, it can be a little hairy navigating, oh, my application needs this optional claim, which ones are applicable, which ones aren't. This is actually meant to just show it is kind of an issue that our customers have voiced to us saying, I don't really know which ones are applicable to my app or not. And this next slide kind of drives it home as well. This is the current experience that's available for updating, configuring your and adding optional claims. This is with the application manifest, the manifest editor underneath the Azure AD application registrations experience. And I just wanted to again point out there are kind of some trouble spots that our customers have voiced to us over the past year. The one is that it is somewhat tedious. I'm calling out in red here. That is a sample client ID where you are literally have to cut and paste the application ID for each sort of custom extension optional claim that you want to add or configure. And there's not really a great reason around why we have that requirement. It can also be confusing. I've called this out in blue, just highlighting the essential. That really doesn't apply to any of these optional claims that are listed here in this example manifest. And so it's just one of those things where, like the previous slide, it is difficult sometimes to know which properties of an optional claim are relevant or not for the specific optional claim. And then the last thing I'm calling out is it can be error prone. That's the thing I've highlighted in purple there. There's a typo. It should be UPN, not UPNN. So just calling out that while the manifest editor, the manifest experience here does have some error handling, it is pretty limited. And so what we wanted to try to do with this new token configuration experience is really fix the confusion that I outlined in the previous few slides. And so I'm going to jump to a demo. I'm just in app registrations. I'll navigate to app registrations. I've registered a V2 app here, test community call app. And so, like I said before, a V2 app is any app that you've registered using this app registrations experience, not apps.dev.microsoft.com. Those are V1 applications that will get V1 ID tokens. And again, the access token version is going to depend on the resource or resources that you're calling. We'll take this one, test community call app. It's a V2 application that gets V2 ID tokens. And again, quick reminder, if you're calling Microsoft Graph, that resource, that API requests V1 tokens. So you are going to get different token versions. You're going to get V2 ID tokens and V1 access tokens if you have an application that is calling Microsoft Graph that you registered through the app registrations experience. What I'm going to do is navigate to this token configuration blade, which is still public preview. We are planning the next few weeks or next few weeks timeframe. So what I wanted to point out first is you see here I have UPNN, and this is an existing optional claim I've already configured through the manifest. So this is backwards compatible, if you will. Any existing optional claims that you've added configured through the manifest here. I'll just click on this to show you. You can see here, this is the optional claims section. And here's under the ID token, I have added an entry for UPNN, which again, like I said, is incorrect. It's a typo here, but it's not caught here in the manifest. Let me save it. We will point that out to you here in this optional claims view, saying that it is incorrect. If you scroll over this claim is not supported and will not be returned in the token. I have an option to delete it if I want to. So that's just kind of nice. You can see any existing optional claims you've configured. The second thing I'm going to show here is just adding an optional claim. So what I want to do, let's do this. So the nice thing, if you recall, okay, so I can choose my token type. I'll choose ID token, which are V2. If you recall that eye chart that I showed earlier of, well, the tokens that are applicable to your application depend on the type of user, the version of the application, the type of tokens, the version of the token. We figured that all out for you right here. All you have to do is scroll through this list. This is a dynamic list of applicable optional claims for your specific application based on audience type, based on version of the application, based on version of the token, specifically ID token in this case. And so you can see here, I scroll down the list, I see UPN, I add it, and there I have it. And I can make an edit. UPN is one of these special ones. So if you see it, let me just add another optional claim here just to show you. To my ID token, I'll add user account information. UPN is one of the special ones that shows up with a little pencil next to here. This pencil signifies the ability to adjust additional properties for this specific optional claim. Again, this is one of those things where in the charts that I showed earlier, you'd have to kind of figure this out on your own through the documentation. Yes, it's possible, but you're probably not in here every day configuring optional claims. So again, we dynamically will show this pencil whenever you're adding or configuring an optional claim that happens to have additional properties that you can edit. So I click on the pencil, I then see the additional properties that I can configure. And you'll see here, actually, the second option, replacing the hash marks, doesn't actually light up until I've actually clicked this externally authenticated option. I could save. And then what you see here is under optional settings, this changes from blank before to now yes. This is just signifying, yes, I've changed this from the default settings to be externally authenticated, as well as I want the format to replace the hash marks with underscores. What I'm going to do next is, I talked about earlier groups claims. Some applications require group ID information or groups information. So you can also do that. These, you'll notice, unlike the add optional claim experience, I'm not choosing ID access or SAML tokens because groups claims apply to all three. So they apply to all the token types of your application. What I can choose is which specific groups do I want to return in that groups claim. So it could be security groups, directory groups, or if I click all groups, this will include distribution lists. So you may be wondering, well, why don't I see a separate entry for distribution lists? It's because distribution lists has to be grouped with security groups and directory roles. It's one of those things that cannot be standalone. The other thing too is you'll see here, I can also customize by token type. So even though I get the groups information for all my token types, I can customize how that group information comes back in the token. By default, it's group ID. I can say for my ID token, I want this format. For my access token, I want a different format. And then for my SAML token, I want a different format. Oh, and I first need to check what do I want returned in that group's claim. And I click add, and that's there. And again, you'll see that because I've configured in the groups claim some non-default settings, I've changed the format of how I want to see this group's information for my ID access and SAML tokens. You'll see that, again, optional settings is set to yet, or I see yes in this column. That's the end of the demo. I want to kind of pause before I wrap up with some kind of important notes to see if there's any questions on the demo.
There are a whole bunch of questions. Do you
Okay.
want to go into the IAM, or do you want me to read them?
Yeah. Yep, I got the IAM open. What would be my resource type v1, v2 if I create a new app? So that depends on the resource you're calling. So like I said, I'm not sure what APIs or resources your app is calling. If you use the app registrations experience and that I just showed, and you register the app, it's going to be a v2 app calling the v2 endpoint. So your ID tokens are always going to be v2. The access tokens that are used to call your resource, it depends on the resource that you're calling. If you're calling Microsoft Graph, it's going to be v1 tokens. And so if I were to actually have my application call Microsoft Graph, and then I went into the access token configuration screen, in the you would see, and dynamically we would return a list of claims that are applicable to your v1 access token. This one I think is for Vince, so I'll put that on the back burner. And Vince, maybe you can loop back and answer this. Why don't we see custom claims like synced extension attributes like we have it for SAML-based apps? So the test application that I created, I don't have in this tenant, I don't have any user extension attributes, ANUs that I've created. Otherwise, you would see those. We make a call to bring back any custom extension attributes that you have created in your directory, and we will pull that back dynamically, so you don't have to enter those manually, although you still can. So that's an important note, is everything I've shown here in the token configuration blade, like I showed earlier with the typo in the manifest, everything I've done here in the token configuration preview experience, you'll see is all here in this JSON entry under optional claims. Everything down to additional properties for my groups. All this is doing is to layer on top of the manifest that's updating JSON, just to make it easier. So again, so you as a developer and app admin don't have to look up which optional claims are applicable to my application and to my tokens. And you don't have to enter those custom extension optional claims manually. Johnny, can we configure tenant level attributes? Yes, you should be able, Johnny, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the question is if it's tenant specific directory extension attributes, then yes. Otherwise, you can definitely ping me and I can follow up. My email is kevin.em@microsoft.com. Dana, you can probably list our contact information. Do we still need to create a claims? Yeah, go ahead.
So my question on that is, if I do have some attributes configured through the claims mapping policy, so the same attribute, can I configure through the experience that you have just shown? I mean, optional attribute, optional claim.
Yes. Yeah. So there's one important difference here, Johnny, is that claims mapping is done at the tenant specific level. Everything I showed previously with optional claims, adding it, is at the application object level. So it's slightly different. While they're very related, claims mapping is more about transformation of claims. Like I want the claim, a tenant-specific claim, to look slightly different versus what I was showing was I want to either add or delete claims that my application is requesting. So while there are similarities, I don't think you would be able to actually see any claims mapping policies, or you wouldn't see any claims mapping policies in the token configuration experience. I will say, though, Johnny, that we are working on an experience. I'm working with that team longer term to merge the experiences. So when you go to token configuration, instead of just being able to manage optional claims for your application, you would also be able to transform what those optional claims look like at the tenant-specific level.
Okay, thank you. And my question on that V1, V2. So if I create a new resource using the app registration portal, is that going to give you a V1 token or a V2 token?
That's a good question. I believe it should be V2, but let me, I'll take this one down as a question, and I will make sure to get back to you. Dana, do we have a way of posting kind of follow-up answers on this, for this specific call?
Yes, we can. We can take some Q&A and kind of as reminders of things we answered and things we haven't, and add it to a blog post that we can then publicize through our Twitter handle to let them know it's available.
Okay. So yeah. Johnny, I took that question down, and I will make sure to follow up. Okay, so Mike, I think it was a similar question that Johnny had around claims mapping policy. Yes, what I just showed was purely adding or removing which claims are included in the token. Claims mapping, if you need to, for example, you've added UPN as an optional claim that is included in your token, but you need it to look slightly differently, yes, you would still need a claims mapping policy to transform what that looks like. What I just showed is really just yes or no, it's included in the token or not. All right, so Anuj, if I do not want custom optional claims in access token or ID token and want to retrieve from graph endpoint, what should I mention in request? Hold this one till the next slide. I think I may answer this one in my follow-up slide. Actually, Anuj, so there is some overlap between what you can request from, say, user.read from Microsoft Graph, and there are some though that you need to request through OpenID Connect. So that's where I have a documentation link on the last slide that I'll talk about that I think gets to this. It may not answer it directly, but the documentation does cover this. Do I get all the groups? So Victoria, that's a good question. There are some limitations to the number of groups that are returned in the claim. I think if it's over like 160, this is in the documentation, we will return a link to the groups rather than the list of groups itself. That's in the documentation link that I list on the last slide that I have, which actually maybe I should have covered first before taking questions. Let's see. Let's just cover off on these. Anuj, to send UPN in actual format, not extension, extension hash, only applies to users from external Azure AD. In future, can we expect users to do? So this is kind of out of my realm. I can take this one back, Anuj, as a follow-up with one of my colleagues that owns the all-up optional claims feature. I can follow up with him on this. What I'm the PM for is just the UI experience that layers on top of the manifest experience. So let me cut really quick to the last slide, which is this one. So just some caveats that some optional claims require additional OpenID Connect scopes. So these scopes, I've just showed a screenshot here. It may be a little hard to see, but I'm in the app registrations API permissions blade or page. And I've just clicked on add permission, and I've clicked on Microsoft Graph and then delegated permissions. And so some of the claims, these claims actually here, these 5, require additional Microsoft Graph OpenID Connect scopes. These are specifically the Microsoft Graph user endpoint permissions. And so OpenID, you need that across the board for any claim, let alone optional claims. But what I've kind of highlighted here that I've checked boxed is if you want nickname, family name, given name, or UPN, you need to include profile. This is something that has popped up on our radar since we launched this public preview experience a few months ago of customers saying, oh, I clicked all these, I clicked these claims, but why do I still not see them in my token? Well, it's because you only had OpenID as a Microsoft Graph OIDC scope. You also need to check this box so that your application in the token request is also including this in the scope parameter profile. And if you want email, there's this email checkbox that you have to check. Just put an asterisk here because email, this value is actually populated by default for users outside the tenant. If you have a multi-tenant app and someone outside the tenant is logging in, these values are populated by default in the token. For managed users within the tenants, you need to check this email box in order to get that back. We are working on a feature or planning to do a feature where when you're in the token configuration experience, we'll automatically indicate if you've selected any of these, give you an option to set it right there and add this from within the token configuration experience, or at the very least notify you that, hey, these 5 that you've selected require additional MS graph scopes that you haven't added. That's in the works. So no ETA on it, but that's definitely something we want to make more intuitive. So this is the documentation link that I talked about. If you go to aka.ms WAC optional claims, you see detailed information on, like, for example, the group's limits and which applicable claims and things like that, and more details.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I posted a couple things in the IM chat. You can follow us on Twitter at Microsoft 365 Dev. It will provide all the latest announcements related to this call, to other Microsoft Identity Platform features and news. And then this recording will also be posted on YouTube, and that link is in the IM chat as well. We'll let you know as soon as it's up. And in the blog post, we'll get answers to the questions that we weren't able to answer in this call today. On the screen is our other developer community calls across the Microsoft 365 platform. If you don't have any of those or we're not aware of them, feel free to join any or all of those calls. And lastly, our next call will be on Thursday, April 16th at 9 a.m. We look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, you can get in touch with us in a variety of ways that we've talked about today. And thank you to our speakers for joining today and doing some great presentations and demos.
Thanks, Sarah.